All right, we're using Apple numbers and we have just a kind of a typical looking spreadsheet here. We're going to take the advantage of the fact that Apple numbers is actually just an open canvas. We're going to style this data so it's a lot easier to use. And we're going to do it by moving it into different tables. All right, so I'll show you what that means. So right now we're looking at what I would call a typical spreadsheet. And what I mean by typical is that so you have your main kind of table of data at the top, and then you have some supplementary tables at the bottom. And some things are already happening here. So for example, the column label in B12 is cut off, and you could resize the columns, but then it's going to make the column up here the wrong width. All right, so that's one of the problems that you'll encounter by sharing tables. Another one is that it just kind of blends together, right? This is all the same styling. And the headers, so you do have table headers. If you come over to the right, we chose this style on the upper left-hand corner, actually defaulted to that. But that styling only works here, right? So this is a header here as well, but it's hard to tell. Another thing that's going on with this data that makes it harder to look at is that we offloaded some of it to sheet 2. So it's okay having it here, but you can't see it, right? So it's easy to forget that it's there. We're going to move this back to the main sheet, but keep it separated, and I'll show you how we do that. So let's go back to sheet 1. We're going to get optimistic. We're going to label this. We'll label it only. It's the only sheet we need. All right, and then we want to get all 3 of these into separate tables, and then we'll talk about what we can do with them from there. So we will go up to table, we'll click on that, we will add another one, and then we'll click on table again, and we will add a third table, and we will shrink this down because the view is already getting a little cramped. Okay, so let's move the totals by warehouse over to table 2. And so the first thing that we'll do is we'll take advantage of the fact that tables can be named. All right, so instead of just table 2, now we'll call this totals by warehouse. And that will give us some superpowers with the cell references that you will see in a second. We will take these headers, there's just 2 of them, and we'll copy them into the location that's pre-styled to be headers. So that already looks better, right? It's apparent that those are labels. We'll come down and get east, north, and south. We will paste those into here. All right, and then get the quantities as well. So I was expecting that. Those broke. We have to redo these cell references, so let's delete those. So what we'll do, we'll hit the equal sign, and we'll just use our mouse. So we will come over and we will grab the 54, and we'll say plus. 44 is also in the east warehouse, and then 24. We'll hit enter. We'll do that again for north and for south. So some things that we can do now that this is in its own table. One is that we can tighten up the column widths, something that's you can never do when you're sharing a table. We can make it fit it a little bit better. So we will make it only the number of columns and rows that we need. So that looks nice, right? It's completely independent. It's apparent what it is. It's labeled by totals by warehouse, and that gives us the power that when we reference it from somewhere else, you can type in the name of the table and it will dynamically grab it and then let you get inside the table with your formulas. So we hit escape, and then on that note, we're going to relabel table 1 just to be, we'll say inventory. Right, and the last thing we need to get out of there is the totals by item. This is going to be similar, but I'm going to copy it all and paste it. Then I'll fix up these formulas on my own here. All right, now that we've tightened this table up, we'll again give it a nice label. So we'll say totals by item. And then we can come back and we can get them out of this main table. So this main table really only contains one type of data. So we had talked about this information that was completely on another sheet. If I select this entire table and and I do Control X, I come over to here and I do Control V as in Victor to paste it. It'll bring the entire table over. All right, so now that we have all of these tables in one sheet, we'll do some of the things that you can't do when they're all in the same table. So let's use this sheet as an example. So we already talked about putting the title on it, but you can come over here and you can change the styling. Well, let's tighten this up a little bit. We'll delete this row, delete the column. So we'll do this in order to take advantage of the fact that we have it in its own table. We want the data to start at the top with headers and at the left with the labels. So we'll pick a style for it. And this table style has a footer on it as well, but we'll come down and we'll say we have one column on the left that we would like you to style as, we'll say labels. We have a column on the top, and then we'll just say we don't have a footer. So that'll give us a nice custom style there. And you can control other things as well, like the font and the grid lines for the entire table. And another thing that you can do in Apple Numbers that you can't do in other programs is that because this is an open canvas, is you can add other elements to it. So let's say text, if we want to add a label to all of this to say, this is our inventory matrix, we'll call it. That sounds important, right? And we can style that individually without touching the styling of anything else in the spreadsheet. All right, and now that we've made this sheet look nice, it's a lot easier to read. We'll talk about how to reference cells in other tables and other sheets. I'll see you in that video. Thanks for watching.